In the last screencast, we configured a server to host the popular CMS software WordPress. In this tutorial, we'll be creating a reverse proxy that can be used to sit in front of our web server in order to increase performance, security, and eventually to be set up to load balance between multiple back-end web servers, though the configuration for this won't be covered until later tutorials. So why Nginx, and what is Nginx? Well, Nginx is a reasonably new web server for Linux, which has gained a lot of traction in recent years, mainly because it runs a lot leaner in terms of hardware requirements and is much faster when compared to other web hosting software such as Apache and IIS. For these reasons, it's now been used by some of the largest websites on the internet, including How2Forge, WordPress itself, and the biggest player of them all, Facebook. So before installing and configuring Nginx as an RPS, or reverse proxy server, it'll help to just have a look at where the RPS is going to sit in our network and how it will be used in order to proxy traffic to our website. The diagram I have here shows a client connecting from the internet will actually have its connection terminated at the RPS, which is here. The RPS itself will then establish a connection to the back-end server, which is our website we set up in the previous screencast, in order to finally send the content back to the reverse proxy, and then the reverse proxy in turn sends it back to the internet. All this, of course, goes via our firewall where we'd have our natting set up to convert from clients connecting on the internet to our internal address here. Because Nginx isn't included in the Rails 6 mirrors, in order to get Nginx installed, we're first going to have to add the epool repository. To do this, fire up a web browser, as I have done here, and head over to fedoraproject.org/wiki/epool. Now on this page you'll find a section titled How Can I Use These Extra Packages? Just click on that link to go to the relevant part of the page, and then select the correct link here for your distribution or your version. In this case I'm using Enterprise Linux 6. On this page finally you'll find the actual RPM that you can run to install the epool repository. So I'm just going to copy this link address, and back on my newly installed Rails 6.3 server here that I'm going to use for installing Nginx, I'm just going to run rpm minus capital U VH and then paste the link to that RPM, which will install and configure the epool repository. So once the epool repository is available, we can now install Nginx using yum install Nginx, as you would expect. With the software installed, we now need to create our configuration file, which will tell Nginx to proxy all requests through to the backend server hosting our WordPress website. To do this, start by changing to the Nginx configuration directory under /etc nginx conf.d. In this directory you'll find a file called default.conf, and you'll first want to just move the configuration or disable the configuration in that file by moving the file to default.conf.orig or disabled, for example. With that file disabled, we're now going to create a new file called wordpress-proxy.conf. Into this file I'm just going to paste some configuration that's up on the castix.wordpress.com website under this the page for this video, and this is going to be enough just to set us up with some basic configuration in order to reverse proxy to our website. Now most of these directives should be fairly self-explanatory. We're listening of course on port 80 for incoming connections. The server name for this virtual host is wordpress.castix.local, and most importantly the address of our backend web server that's actually running WordPress, in this case 192.168.122.10 as per that diagram that I showed just before. So I'll save that configuration file now. So last up, there's only really a couple of things left to do. The first one, of course, as I mentioned in the previous screencast, is that we need to add a local firewall rule to allow connections on port 80. By default, RHEL 6 and certainly other distributions only allow traffic on port 22. So to do this, I'm just going to run the iptables command to insert a new rule at line 5 of the input table. I'm going to say if the state of the connection is new, the protocol is TCP, and the destination port is port 80, then allow the traffic. And of course you're going to want to save that to make sure that the next time the server is rebooted, that firewall rule is there as well. Lastly, we can now finally start our service with service Nginx start. And one thing I've just recalled that I may have forgotten to do earlier is to ensure that check config, ensure that Nginx is configured to start when the server starts. You can use check config Nginx on to make sure that that happens. So at this point, Nginx should be all set up, configured and ready to go. The only thing you'll need to do, and certainly I've done it here, is to reconfigure your DNS records for this host. So instead of pointing the record wordpress.castix.local at the actual web server, that record should now resolve to the IP address of the reverse proxy, which in my case on my network here is 192.168.122.5. So as I say, I've just put a record in for that in my etc host file, and I'll see if that works by going to not castix.wordpress.local but wordpress.castix.local. Hurrah! So what we're seeing here, of course, is the same website we set up in the last screencast, but this time being served up by Nginx as a reverse proxy. And I wouldn't be surprised if you also notice, as I certainly have, that even just with having this extra server sitting in front of Apache, there's quite a noticeable performance increase. But as I mentioned at the start of the screencast, in conjunction with that, you can also start to put in things such as access control lists or perhaps a web application firewall on the RPS to greater improve the security of the website as well. So with our reverse proxy all configured and up and running, that brings us to the end of this tutorial. Just to summarize, of course, what we've been over. To start with, we've installed epool so that we can get access to the Nginx RPM and install that. You then created the configuration file, which all the contents are up on castix.wordpress.com. And finally, we added a local firewall rule to allow connections on port 80 to our RPS and started the Nginx service. Really as simple as that. If you would like any more information or to watch other screencasts, browse to castix.wordpress.com. Thank you very much for watching.